One Piece RPGs have a history of not being the best. But can One Piece Odyssey break that streak? Everything shown so far has looked pretty great, but how did it actually turn out? Well, stick around and I'll tell you all about it. Now, full disclosure, I don't watch One Piece and would not really consider myself a fan. I don't hate it or anything, I just am not a fan of the show. Everything I know about it has been absorbed by just being on the internet. Ironically though, a One Piece game is my most watched review on the channel. Go figure. Now with that disclaimer out of the way, let's dig into the story. Here, the Straw Hat Pirates are sailing the open seas and spot a mysterious island and they want to explore it. However, a storm appears and shipwrecks them on that island. Now, after gathering themselves, the crew run into two explorers who live on the island, Audio and Lim. Audio helps the crew get a lay of the land, while Lim is a little more mysterious. Now, to fully unlock the mystery of the island, the crew will need to travel through Memoria, essentially memories of past adventures with a twist. Events won't exactly play out the same way they did in the show. So for fans who are familiar with these arcs, you'll still be able to enjoy something new here. Now, presentationally, Odyssey does a fantastic job capturing the spirit of the show with exaggerated movements and reactions, as well as capturing the camaraderie between the Straw Hat crew. And it's not all visual novel style segments either. They do a lot of cutscenes with unique animations. And for better or worse, all the voiceover here is only in Japanese with no English option available. Now, like I said in the opening, I'm not super familiar with the source material, so all the Memoria segments didn't really grab me as it probably will for existing fans. To me, Odyssey feels like a love letter for fans, which is a good thing if you love the show or the manga, but if you're not, you probably won't get as much out of it, especially when it comes to the side quests, as again, it appears like you're hunting down characters from the show. Now, is it possible for you to understand and follow what's happening if you've never watched the show? Absolutely. In fact, the game goes out of its way with many explainer segments to catch you up. Bandai Namco even has a website with longer story summaries if you want to dive in. I'll leave a link to those in the description. So if you're going in fresh having never watched the show, you may end up enjoying the story here more than I did. Now, first and foremost, One Piece Odyssey is a turn-based RPG, with combat being by far the most common activity. Now, battles begin by running into enemies as you're exploring areas, and you can get a boost in battle if you run into them from behind. Now, the game has something called a scramble area battle system. Essentially, you'll have 4 active party members, but when the battles begin, they'll be divided into smaller groups with different enemies. So it's not just your entire squad versus their entire squad. I actually like this because it adds a unique dynamic feel to combat. Now, for the basics, you basically have 4 options. You can use items, do basic attacks, perform abilities, or do big team-up attacks. Now, abilities cost TP or tension points to perform, and you actually have a pretty big pool of TP for each character, so don't feel like you need to be restrictive. Just go crazy and use your best abilities. Now, your basic attacks do restore a certain amount of TP, so there's a really good balance there. Now, for team-up attacks, this is where 3 characters come together for one giant one, and they all need to be in the active party at the same time to pull off. These also require bond points to perform, which build by either hitting every enemy in the battle at once, healing a party member, or defeating an enemy. Another key mechanic is rock, paper, scissors, or in this case, power, speed, and technique. Every character and every enemy is strong and weak against a certain element, so in each battle it's all about exploiting that weakness. Something else you'll be doing constantly in battle is swapping out characters, and not just with your reserve characters, but between the different areas within each battle itself. This is really helpful if you have a particular character, for example, that's in an area full of enemies that are really weak to, and you need to swap it out for somebody that's strong. I really love this because it felt super flexible and dynamic. Turn-based combat can often feel static and stale at times, but here you're always swapping characters out and trying to find the perfect setup. Adding an extra dynamic element are dramatic scenes. Essentially, these are random combat challenges that will pop up. For example, you'll have to defeat certain enemies in one turn or beat a certain enemy with a specific character. There's no downside to not doing them, but if you do them, you'll get a huge boost of experience points. So whenever these pop up, I highly encourage you to do them. Also, if the combat feels slow, there is a speed up mechanic that you can turn on to make battles go faster. Overall, I really like this combat system. It feels dynamic, fun, and always keeps you on your toes. That said, there are a few drawbacks. For one, the user interface can feel a little too busy at times. For example, if you look at the enemies, the blue down arrows mean they're strong to your attacks and the red up arrows mean they're weak to them. To me, it just felt like there was too much animation going on and it was kind of hard to focus and tell at a quick glance what was happening. And same thing with who you're targeting. There's like this little animation that will pop up, and between all the other little animations, it's really hard to tell who you're targeted at. And lastly, the turn order. With each enemy, they have this sort of like little circle around them, and depending on how far up it's filled, that determines who attacks next in battle. But again, between all the different animations, it can be hard to tell what's happening at a quick glance. Also, the weakness chart goes away pretty quickly during combat, and I wish they would just leave it up because I don't always have everybody's weaknesses memorized. But to me, the bigger problem with the combat is there's just too much of it. Like I said, it's by far the most common activity, and it really starts to lose its luster the longer the game goes on, which is a shame because exploration and puzzles in the game are really fun, there's just not enough of them. Now, when you're exploring, there's lots of little distractions and things to find, and it's actually fun to interact with the world thanks to each character's unique field action. For example, Luffy can zip to designated spots throughout the world, Chopper is small enough to squeeze into smaller spaces, and Nami can find extra money just lying around. Like in combat, you'll be constantly swapping out different characters while you're exploring to find all the different things throughout the world. It feels fun and satisfying, and dungeons are probably the best example of this as they typically are designed around using multiple characters' unique abilities. However, at the end of the day, you'll probably end up using Luffy the most. Now, where gathering items from exploring comes in handy is with crafting. At campsites scattered throughout the world, you can craft different items like food that gives you boosts in battles, trick balls that can give enemies debuffs, as well as equipment. Now, equipment is kind of unique. It's not something where you just equip it on a character, but it's more on like a grid. And it starts off kind of simple with each equipment taking up an entire grid, but as the game goes on, it kind of becomes more like a game of Tetris as you need to squeeze as many in as you possibly can. Also at campsites, you can throw a party. Outside of just a fun animation, these will give you temporary XP boosts in combat, so I highly recommend doing these as often as possible. Something else you'll find while exploring are cube fragments. These are character-specific items that you can use to enhance character abilities. Certain abilities have slots that you can put in these cube fragments, and the more you put in, the stronger those abilities become. To me, these were the most fulfilling reward to find as they gave the biggest tangible benefits. Lastly, when exploring, you'll find things called memory fragments. These throw you into short little scenarios with a very specific set of characters. Once completed, you'll gain team-up abilities that are super powerful in combat, so I highly encourage you to do those as often as you can whenever you run across them. Now, exploring is fun, it's just not sprinkled in enough to balance out the pacing. And from an overall design perspective, I feel like pacing is the game's biggest issue. Either you're in a lot of combat or a lot of story. And in that respect, I think it helps to be a One Piece fan as it makes sitting through these segments a lot more tolerable. The opening hour, for example, is agonizingly slow, constantly stopping you from playing the game to explain something. There was one time where I had a cutscene that ended, I walked literally 2 feet and then another cutscene popped out. I just wanted to play the game. But when you are let off the leash to explore at your leisure, that is really where the game shines brightest. Odyssey is probably the best looking One Piece game yet, and as many people have noted, it kind of reminds them of Dragon Quest, and I think that's a fair comparison. It has a really crisp art style that reflects the show really well, and has nice looking environments. The world itself is just brimming with life, whether you're out in the world fighting monsters or people walking around the town. And between combat and story segments, the animations are absolutely fantastic. It really captures the spirit of the show with each character's unique quirks. Now, during my time playing, I didn't experience any bugs or major issues. I'm sure other people will, but for me, I didn't. And I played on PlayStation 5, and for me, it ran super well with load times being nearly non-existent. To say the least, if you're playing on a current-gen system, you won't be disappointed. One Piece Odyssey is undeniably the best One Piece RPG yet. It has a great presentational flair, fun dynamic combat, and neat exploration mechanics. And this is easily the biggest one too, with well over 40 hours of gameplay. Now it does have some pacing issues, but it's just really well made overall. That said, I think this is truly aimed at One Piece fans. There's a lot of fan service as you'll be going back to areas from the show. Now you could enjoy it and have a good time if you're not, but if you are a fan of the show, this is an absolute must-play game. Now, if you want to learn more about One Piece Odyssey, consider subscribing as I'll have more coverage coming soon, including a tips video with a solution to an annoying puzzle earlier in the game that you're going to want to know. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.